Hi, I'm Sabrina. Welcome back to my channel. So a few years ago, I moved from my parents' house in New York down to Georgia. Probably more than a few years ago, but who's counting? Anyway, whenever I go back and visit my family, there's usually a pile of stuff for me to go through to either figure out if I want to keep it, donate it, or try and take it back with me. And recently on a visit, this was in my pile of stuff. A pack of origami paper, and upon seeing this, the conversation in my head went a little bit something like this. Wow, I cannot believe I still have this. When did I get this? Did I get this in like 5th grade? Oh, crane dress. What? Crane dress? A dress made entirely out of origami cranes. Okay. What do you want me to do with that thought exactly? Oh, nothing. Just thought it might be kind of cool. Well, now you know I have to try and make it, right? No! I mean, you don't have to make it, but I did come up with a pretty cool design. Damn it, give me that. Oh! Sure, you can do the easy part, and now I have to do all the hard stuff. You got this. I'm rooting for you. Yeah. Which brings me to the design. So my initial base thought that popped into my head was Effie's butterfly dress from the Hunger Games, but instead of butterflies, cranes. But even though that was kind of a cool thought, I figured 1, it had already been done, and 2, butterflies lay flat, and so that made sense for that style of dress, but with cranes, which are very 3D, I figured it would just look like a piled lump of paper. So I wanted to go with something different and a little bit more dramatic. So I thought a little bit more on a design, and instead of just making a dress that was entirely made out of cranes, I thought, what if I made a dress and then made it look like a flock of origami cranes was taking off and kind of flying around the dress. So this is the design I came up with, and for the color palette for this dress, I used the color of the origami paper as my inspiration, focusing mostly on red and then some oranges and yellows. And now that the design was figured out, it was time for a proof of concept. Ta-da! I know what you're thinking. Sabrina, those are origami cranes. Congratulations, you know how to fold an origami crane. How is this a proof of concept? Well, first off, I didn't know how to fold an origami crane. If you'll notice, this packet still exists, even though I got it when I was probably like 10 years old. So 1, I had to first see if I could actually fold an origami crane, and luckily the internet exists, so I was able to fold an origami crane. But 2, these are not actually paper. I don't know if you can tell, but they are made of fabric. And that was the real challenge I wanted to try to figure out, is I didn't want to use paper for this. I didn't know how well it would stand up, and honestly I just wanted it to be fabric. Paper just seemed like a cop-out. So I did a test and found that I could actually fold paper into cranes, and since that test went successfully, it was time to move on to the actual dress. So let's do it. First, I got my fabric. Once I had my fabric, it was time to start making cranes. I started this by obviously cutting a bunch of squares. Originally, I was doing this with a ruler, but because I don't completely hate myself, I got one of these guys, which made the process go a lot faster and a lot smoother. And after I had a bunch of squares, I painted on my fabric stiffener just using a paintbrush, setting them out, letting them dry, and after that, they were nice and stiff so I could fold them. So in this clip, you'll see that crane took about 4 minutes to fold. So 1 crane took 4 minutes, and that's if I was going really ham. If I was talking to someone or watching TV or being distracted by a cute cat, that time went up significantly. So let's say on average a crane took about 6 minutes to make. That means in an hour, I would have about 10 cranes. That means in 10 hours, I would have 100 cranes. And I'm not going to say how many cranes are in this dress, but it is more than 100, which means it took more than 10 hours. And that is just the folding process of these cranes. That doesn't take into account the cutting and stiffening and making the actual dress and everything else. So just if you want an idea of how long this dress took, that is just a brief insight into how long this dress took to make. absurd amount of cranes, it came to my attention that I might actually want to start on the dress that these cranes were going to go on. I started on the dress by cutting out my pattern pieces, then cutting my fabric. The fabric I got was a stretch polyester, that way it would hopefully be semi-form-fitting. Once my pattern pieces were cut out, I started by assembling the top of the dress, sewing together both the outside and lining layer. I then did some adjusting to make it better fit my figure. Then the pattern called for stays, but I couldn't find any at Joann's and I didn't feel like waiting and ordering some, so instead I got thick zip ties and just cut them to size and sanded down the edges so they were round. Then I just sewed channels between my two layers for them to nestle in. Then I sewed together the front skirt panels and the back skirt panels. The pattern said to do this separately, but I don't really know why since I sewed them all together shortly after anyway. And once those were together, I sewed the bottom and the top of the dress together. Now I swore I got a pattern that fit my measurements, and while the top was a little loose and needed some adjustments, the skirt was huge and had room for hips and a badonk that I just do not possess, which meant I had to take it in a lot, which led to these weird holes on either side, which meant I had to take the dress apart a little so that the fabric would lay flat. It was very annoying, and here's me justifying it both to you and myself that it was worth it. And lastly came the zipper. This is the part I was dreading because I thought it was going to be a huge pain and very difficult, but it actually ended up going super smoothly. I pinned it in once, tried it on, it was a little bit loose, I took it in a little bit more, and it was fine, so I just sewed it in after that. Next it came time to figure out how I was actually going to get all the cranes onto the dress. First, I just pinned them in place so I had a rough idea of how they were going to look and where they were all going to sit. Once I was happy with how the cranes looked on the dress, I took a bunch of pictures, that way I had reference, took them off the dress, and then painstakingly started hand stitching them to the dress. I say painstakingly because it did not occur to me that I was going to have to hand stitch through the fabric of the dress as well as multiple layers of stiffened fabric. And I don't know if you can see in the clips, but I had to use both a thimble as well as pliers to get the needle to go through this many layers of fabrics. It was just so hard, and it took a lot of effort and actually really hurt my hands. After I had all the cranes that were going to be attached directly to the dress, it was time to figure out how to make the crane train. So for this, I decided to go with monofilament, aka fishing wire, because it is virtually invisible and it would hopefully look like the cranes were flying or floating and you wouldn't really be distracted by what was holding them onto the dress. And to make sure that the cranes stayed where I wanted them on the line, I used crimp beads. If you take anything new away from this video, I will just say crimp beads are a really cool thing to have in your artisanal tool belt. They're just little silver beads that you crimp onto the line using pliers, and it holds a spot so you can either use them to separate beads or separate objects along a strand. It makes it a lot easier and faster than trying to tie knots and making sure your knot is big enough to not have stuff fall down. Just a cool tool if you didn't know about it. So originally I was just going to attach the train directly to the dress, but as I was working on it, I rethought that for a couple reasons. One is the dress on its own without the train was something that I could potentially wear out somewhere, while with the train it wouldn't be very maneuverable out in public, so I thought to have the two separate might be a good idea. Two is the crane strands were actually really heavy, and so I didn't know how I would be able to attach them to the dress in a way that was, one, appealing visually, and two, wasn't irritating to wear, because I figured if I sewed them through the dress, all the knotting and whatever was going to be holding it in place was going to be on the inside, rubbing up against me. And I didn't know if having all that weight on that like elasticy fabric, and just having like a knot behind holding it in place would rip through the fabric. So I thought it might be smart to rethink and have it so the train was actually detachable. So you'll see I used the fabric of the dress as well as 2 layers of batting to make like this little belt sash thing that would then be attached to the back of the dress. So I was able to attach all my strands to that and have it go through the batting so it had a bit more to hold on to. And then to attach that sash piece to the dress, I hand sewed hooks onto the sash, and then I made little eyelets on the dress just out of thread that the hooks could go into, so that way I could put the train on the dress. And finally, after literally months of working on this dress, the dress is done. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you want to see more like this, please think about subscribing, because like I said, I work full-time, and so I do not have a normal schedule I can stick to, and I would love for this to be my full-time thing and I can regularly put out videos. So please, if you like this, subscribe, like, and share. And with that, let's get on to the reveal.